Hi, I'm Tom Stephenson and welcome to lecture 11A of our residential construction technology course. Today we're going to be looking at renovations in part A and we'll be looking at multi-unit buildings in 11B. So it's broken out into two distinct lectures because it's two distinct topics. So on the renovation side, we're going to be discussing some of the things that are a little bit different with renovations, comparing, contrasting that to everything that we've looked at this semester with regards to new residential construction, and but some of the big differences that go into renovations. Renovations is a very big sector in the construction industry. It's bigger than new construction, and because there's a lot of existing houses and buildings, and they are constantly needing attention. As we've kind of mentioned in the past, it's kind of the iceberg effect. A new house or a new building or a new structure costs so much to build, and then there's the ongoing life cycle of that structure and building. And if you're ripping out walls and redoing the insides but keeping the outside, like in this example over here, that's going to have a huge impact on cost over the life cycle of the building. At some point, maybe the building reaches highest best use and then it declines and then something else gets built new in that place. But until that time, there's typically a lot of renovations, additions, new layouts, new occupancy purposes that go on with residential structures. And one of the things that we have to be able to think about with renovations is it is different than new construction. It takes a lot more time, a lot more labor trying to fit it new against old. Old is not all perfect, that is for sure. Floors are not level, walls are not plumb, things have sagged. Different materials, as you again can see from this image, older materials were made a little bit different, were cut a little bit different sizes. We have to tie the new into the old. We have to try to compromise sometimes because you can't necessarily make a old house that's not plumb or level all of a sudden magically plumb or level. Neither does the client maybe want to pay to redo everything. So sometimes you have to really sort of look at things creatively and figure out how can I transition this into from the old to the new and make it look nice and not like something stuck against something else. So it takes a lot of skills, and no two projects are alike. And you have to have a fair bit of experience with it. I often say if you've been working in new construction and you start working in renovations, you're kind of in for a wake-up call because it is different, and you do have quite a bit more knowledge that you have to draw upon and a good understanding of how things were built in the past. So that helps you to better understand what you're going to run into because surprises lurk. Even for very experienced people, you can get surprised pretty easily along the way. If this little close-up maybe gives you an idea. We've talked earlier in the course about dimensional lumber, and it's 2 by 4, 2 by 6, 2 by 8, 2 by 10, 2 by 12. And we said, you know what? It's not actually 2 inches, it's an inch and a half. Well, if you look closely at this is an inch and a half thick. This is a part of an older house. This house is probably it's for sure predating World War II. So it might be around, actually, I remember the house, it's probably around 1915. And so a 2 by 4 was actually 2 inches by 4 inches. And these little lighter strips you see, that was wood lath, wood strips that were put on with a little space between them. And then the plaster was actually troweled onto it, and a little bit of the plaster would go between that space and hook into the lath. And that's how the plaster stayed on the wall. Of course, we don't do that anymore. Now we use drywall. So it comes in sheets, very quick to apply, doesn't require the same kind of skill that plastering did. Doesn't take the same kind of time either. So big differences in the technology over the years, how you use it. And then you have to tie old to new. So these are some of the challenges that you run into. And, early 1900s, anything that's pretty much before World War II was lath and plaster. After World War II, you got gyprock lath and plaster, which was kind of like If you're used to drywall today, it was kind of like smaller stuff. It was like 16 inches by 4 feet, and then you'd nail that on, and then the plasterer would go over that. So it was a lot less work to put that on than to put wood lath, but still the plastering idea was very similar. Plastering required 3 coats. You had to put on a what they called a scratch coat, because they would trowel it on and then they'd run this little sort of wire thing over it that'd scratch it so it'd roughen the surface. Then they'd put their finish coat, right? And they put that over it. They called it the brown coat. And then over the brown coat, they put the putty coat. And the putty coat was this nice white um, lime that was basically slaked. And slaked is that it was allowed to sort of percolate overnight and become a very smooth kind of cream that would be troweled on and give a nice finish to the actual wall. It took artisans to actually trowel that on. They could smooth out a wall and smooth out imperfections. Imperfections like you'd see in an older stud where they weren't milled the way the newer ones were. So they were kind of rough cut and they had little imperfections in them, but the plasters could take that out of it. So of course you renovate against that to this, it's challenging to say the least. And really, drywall really started in the early 1960s. And by the end of probably about 1973, 74, there wasn't too much plastering going on. It took a little bit longer transition, 10, 14 years. Because I remember when I was a kid, we had some jobs where we were doing plastering, and we had some jobs when we were doing drywall. And so it was kind of in that transition period. My house, which was built in 1960, has drywall. So it was probably one of the first houses to have drywall. So definitely when we read and interpret renovation drawings, there's things we got to look at drawings, and then there's things we got to think about with regards to construction. So we got to think about, well, where are the existing walls and which existing walls have to come out? So we kind of looked at dashed lines as meeting a hidden line in this course, something that's behind something. In the building systems, we said that a dashed line could mean a vent for a plumbing system. Well, now I'm going to tell you a dashed line could mean a wall that's going to come out in a renovation drawing. So you have to know what it's pointing at and what the intent is to fully appreciate what you have to do with it. But you kind of know if it's a dashed line and it's a wall that it's pointing at, it's saying that, well, it's either hidden or it has to come out. And usually you can figure that much out by looking at it, right? If it's in a floor plan, it's not going to be hidden. So it must mean that it needs to come out. And usually there'll be a leader line pointed towards it and it'll say remove wall. So that clarifies it for you. You have to think differently with renovations too. You can't necessarily get the materials that were on the old house. So things like brick and things of that nature, good luck at trying to get an exact match. Now, if it's a new addition, maybe you can get something close, and maybe you could put a rainwater leader over the joint so it doesn't really sort of transition from one brick to the other fairly well. But there's always going to be differences sort of in the coloring of the brick, even with dye lots of bricks that are made today. If you get one from a different dye lot and you put it on a house, 2 dye lots, it can look quite different. So you have to be careful about that. If you have the opportunity when you're renovating, you might be able to save some of the brick that you take out, clean them. It's not that bad to clean them. You chip them with a brick hammer and basically the mortar comes off and you can pretty much reuse them. So if you say you had a window that was being bricked in and you were opening up the back of the house, you could save the brick from that to fill in the window, and you could make it look like it's perfectly fine, like there's nothing wrong with it. So the interpretation would be looking at it and it'll look like it was almost always there. So some of these things, they seem like small things, but they make a huge difference in the actual construction process. And you really need to look closely at what's there. And really having a checklist to help you is invaluable. I used to have a checklist of things that I would check if I was going in to look at price a house, if we were going to do an addition on it, because it's so easy to miss certain things and it's hard to remember everything. It makes it much easier. And I would definitely photograph everything with your cell phone as you go in and you're walking around, so you can always reference that later on too. And you might want to do a little bit of investigative work and ask yourself a series of questions. Things like, what is the existing wiring on the house? You know, older houses, they might have knob and tube wiring, they might have aluminum wiring. There's a whole bunch of things that you'd want to have checked out. You want to check out even the water. Well, the water pipes, for the most part, those have been changed, but you never know. There could be the occasional old galvanized iron water pipe. But what is the existing systems, and how will you be able to tie into them appropriately? You may have to get one of your or all of your subs in the key building systems area if you're not sure or confident about what you're looking at with the building systems that are existing, just to make sure there's no surprises, and to make sure that you've covered yourself off on whatever bid that you're putting in for the project too. That, because there's always going to be unknown unknowns, the things we don't know in renovations, but you want to minimize the unknown unknowns so that you have a reasonable amount of known unknowns, and they've been taken care of contractually, so that if there's either contingency or allowances in the contract, that if this condition occurs, this is how we're going to proceed. That can be helpful. You also have to be careful of things such as asbestos. Older houses have a lot of materials that are asbestos related in them. Floor systems, vinyl asbestos tiles in basement, very common. Usually they're 8 by 8, but they could be the 12 by 12. You might have to get them tested. That's a few $100 to get them tested, just to see if it has asbestos. The drywall, the taping compound in the early drywall, it's possible that it could have asbestos in it. A lot of pipe wrap, insulation, things of that nature. Lots of opportunities for these things. The other thing is mold. There could be mold in certain areas too. So you have to be pretty thorough in investigating what's there. And you have to check out and understand what walls are load bearing and non-load bearing if you're going to be removing walls. Determine the type of construction. Is it solid masonry? Is it wood frame? Often you can take off an outlet box cover and you can sort of see in and get a good idea along the edge what's going on. You can also, of course, for solid masonry, just look at the outside of the house, as we've talked about in a previous lecture. And if there's header brick like every 6th course, then you can be pretty confident that it's a solid masonry house. 99% confident if you start seeing header courses every 6 courses, unless it was like a heritage edition or something that was trying to look like it. That would be about the only time I could think that would fool you. But older houses, at least in urban settings like Toronto, are very likely to have solid masonry walls, more likely than wood frame. You get more rural farmhouses than that. Yeah, there was a fair bit of wood frame, but in the city, a lot of solid masonry work, especially stuff built like from the late 1800s, mid 1800s to mid 1950s, early 1960s. Before that, there was a lot of wood frame, but there was also a lot of fires, and there was a lot of issues with that. So fire codes and that kind of really brought in a lot of the masonry idea for housing in Toronto, like Chicago, like London. A lot of these places that had major fires. Okay, so yeah, understanding the time period of the house can be helpful that way. So it's good to once you get a little bit of experience that way, you'll start to know what's going on. Also, access to the site. Some places, you don't even have a driveway. You don't even have parking. That can be problematic. So can you get a temporary permit from the city to park on the street, to have a disposal box on the street, etc. I see houses today. I feel like people just dump boxes on the street and they seem to get away with it. 30 years ago, you couldn't even get away with it. So some things boggle my mind right now with those things. But we used to have a sign and flashing so that basically cars would see it at night and all these other things. So those are all considerations if it's not easily accessible. And also, don't assume the drawings are correct. I've rarely seen drawings correct in renovations. So you got to do your own measurements. Consultants sometimes they make mistakes with measurements. So, you know, some of the questions, some example questions: are the existing walls drywall or plaster? Is the site easily accessible? Um, Sometimes you may have to even negotiate with a neighbor to use their driveway. We've done that in the past. Where we've done that, and the agreement kind of is, well, you'll redo their driveway for them when you're done. So it depends on how much work you're doing and what it is and what the accessibility are. And some neighbors, you got to understand, don't want anything to do with you, and you better not have 1 foot on their property, pretty much. So there's kind of that mix that comes into it with renovation work. By and large, people are pretty cooperative, though. Um, so making sure are things plumb and level and square? Doubt it, but how bad are they? Gives you a good indication, and you can have discussions with the client ahead of time for different approaches that you can take to that. Um, so in the chapter in the textbook, we have this Kalmar drawings. And so if you can't see this, depending what medium you're looking at this, if you can't see it that clearly, if you can watch it on a TV, it looks pretty good, or just open up your textbook in chapter 15, the Understanding Construction Drawings for Housing and Small Buildings textbook. And you'll see that there's an addition that's been put onto the back of this house. These are TACBOC drawings, Toronto Area Chief Building Official Committee. So they're kind of drawn to show you what they would want for a set of drawings for an addition onto a house. The insulation requirements that are on this have gone up since, as every building code ups the insulation requirements. But other than that, it's a reasonable representation of what you'd see on a addition. So for an addition, you would have be building out, you'd have to show a site plan to show the location, the coverage on the lot, what's the existing, what's going to be the proposed. They'll be looking at the setbacks, so the backyard setbacks, the side yard setbacks, etc. So all of that information would be required to be indicated on the drawings. And so that's at the bottom, you see that table which is providing that information. There would come into play, and of course it'd be cross-referenced and checked for things like zoning issues. The number of stories of height becomes an issue very often in some neighborhoods, and again, all of those requirements fitting in with whatever the municipality requires from a zoning perspective. And as the TACBOC details say, and as I've said, it can vary by municipality to municipality and by lot to lot. So you got to be very careful about what the requirements are. So the addition here is showing this is the addition, and this kind of sort of clear information is just the existing, so there's not stuff going on in here in the basement. But you will notice the dashed line that goes across. Well, this would be the back of the house. So that's saying that that's going to be removed, and you're going to put 4 2x10s. So you're going to have a built-up wood beam that is going to go across here. And that dashed line over here is a hidden line showing that there would be a footing below the concrete slab in the basement. So the dashed line would go across 4 2x10s. This would be on a steel column. So much like the new construction that we've looked at in the Brook drawings and other drawings. So that would be supported on a steel column that would be coming across. It would have a steel plate welded to the top of it. And the joists are running in this direction, and they would run into this wood beam. They would be on joist hangers going into the wood beam. And this is for showing you the sonotubes. And if you look that up, that would be the sonotubes that are going to go into the ground to support the deck. So they would be on stirrups sticking up, and then there'd be 4x4 posts that would come up to support the deck. There's a cutting plane line somewhere for a section A, so we know that as well. And it is also showing you've got the furnace, which is heating the house, and it's going to heat this back area. Question is, you'd want to make sure that this furnace has the capacity for this addition, or in the specification somewhere there may be a listing to say to replace the furnace. Right here it's saying the existing furnace is 90,000 BTUs. You have the first floor here, and so this is right above, and again, this would be the back of the house. So the whole brick wall at the back of the house is coming out. Well, you know what? When you take out this wall, you're going to have to put a temporary wall across here to support this floor, because the floor is resting on, the first floor is resting on this wall. You can't just take this wall out without the whole back of the house falling in on you. You would have to put a temporary wall across here. You would take out this wall. You would put in the wood beam, and now that's supporting the floor. So at that point, then you could proceed how you would like. You could then remove the back portion of the wall. Myself, I would probably have the footings going around. I would probably have the back of the house, the foundation wall put in, and then I'm starting to look at this portion here, because then once I've got that supported, I can take this out and I can build this floor in and tie everything to it, and then I can go up from there. So you're trying to think strategically how you would go about this in the best way possible. And the other factors that you might have to consider too is the is the family living in this house. It's a pretty small house, so I've got my doubts on that one. Some houses that are much bigger, though, we've had where we would have the family still live in the house. In cases like that, we would set up like a temporary kitchen in the basement. So you'd have like a stove and a fridge sort of set up, maybe with a simple counter that they could use for the few months that you would be working on the house. That's a possibility, right? Kids maybe going to school nearby, you know, you don't want the big disruption, but yet you want the addition. So that's one way of doing it, and that way they can still eat at home. You know, they'll eat out a lot more, but at least they can do basic functional things that way. So there's different ways that you approach renovations, and you got to look at, well, strategically, am I dealing with the family in the house, or are they moving somewhere else during this? Or for the most part, they're in the house, and then for a period of time, they're going to leave. There's a whole bunch of strategies and discussions that take place around that. But definitely, if you're going to be doing something like this, you're going to cordon off like a large section of the house, right? So you're going to have to cordon a large section of the house off from that perspective, if that's the case. And so this addition on the back here, we would have this back wall coming out. So the dashed line would represent the wall that's coming out. 4 2x10s, that's for the roof. Something has to support the roof. So once again, we would have to make sure that we've got the roof supported temporarily when we remove this back wall. That might be a little bit more complicated. Have to look at that a little bit closer to see exactly how that's done. Doesn't show the direction of the joists. The joists are running here too. So you'd have to make sure that you're looking at what direction of the ceiling joists in this back section. Here it shows the ceiling joists and rafters are running this direction. I'd want to know, is that the case for the whole house? Probably it is. If I take a look at the house over here, well, the existing house, it's a hip roof. So I really want to investigate that to make sure. I wouldn't want to make a judgment call on that they're running the same way all the way through a house. Likely they are, but some things with renovations, you have to do a thorough renovation inspection to be sure of. Then you see this little dashed line in here, through there. That's an existing wall. That's coming out. All right, so that's an existing wall. That's coming out. This back wall is coming out. Doesn't look like there's any changes to these walls. Just looks like you're going to open this up and put a new kitchen in this area. So that's going to be a little bit different that way. This is going to open straight out, so the floors are going to have to line up perfectly. So things like when you look at a section plan, things like this, what you're trying to do, like it says 8'4" from the finished basement slab to the finished first floor. I'm not even worrying about this. Like, I'm worrying about lining up the basement floor, and I'm worried about lining up the first floor. you know what? If it lines up at 8'3" or if it lines up at 8'5", whatever it is, it's got to be at that to match up to that floor. So this gives you an idea, but this isn't like rock solid the way it is in new construction. It's like I got to line up with what's existing. This is going to be really based on how good the measurement and details that the consultant did when they designed it, how close they are to it. But I don't really get into that too much. I'd be investigating this when I'm looking at it in case something's really doesn't make sense. But those are important things to distinguish with renovations, like the ceiling here. You know, I don't care 8'11" to top a plate. I care that this is going to line up with this ceiling because this is going to be open right through. You want a smooth ceiling and you want a smooth floor between. So you got to make those little adjustments in thinking. Even in new construction, often you have to make some of those adjustments in thinking too. Uh, with new construction, you do first floor 8 foot ceiling. Well, it's typically a little bit more. Usually the pre-cut studs that come, they allow for a little bit extra space so the drywall easily goes in. So you kind of go with some of those little nuanced differences. You got to pick up on, though, if something is going to cause a problem later on. Like for me, looking at this section, I'm just looking at that quickly. I noticed this. So in the basement, do I want to have that little bump there? I could put obviously I could put an outside corner on the drywall. I could do that. I would be looking at the ceiling height. I would be discussing that with the client because I could easily make that flush going across here, right? So I could make that flush. I could either use a heavier joist, there'd be less spring in the floor, or strap it down. Probably what I'd have to do is strap it down to make it line up with these particular joists because they're probably the old joists. So they're whatever joist I use, they're not going to be exactly the same. So if these are 2x10s and this is 2x10s I'm using for a beam, these will be a little bit smaller than those. So a lot of these kind of things that you deal with in renovations that you don't deal with in new construction, but they're all little flags for me when I take a look at that. There was another couple of things that I wanted to bring up. Well, tying into the existing room. So it's a 612 slope, 612 slope. 612, so no matter where's the back house, 612, so it's an equal slope roof. I'm not building this thing 612. I'm building this thing whatever this existing roof is. So maybe the consultant did it and it's 612, but you know what? Maybe it's sagged and it's not 612. Maybe it's actually 5.5 12. Well, I'm going to make it 5.5 12 because it's got to sort of line up into the existing roof. So whatever the existing roof is, that's what you do. So those are other things that you have to consider. Then there's stuff like the existing face brick. There's the new brick. I would try to, if I was doing the eaves trough, if it worked, depends what, sometimes it doesn't work, I would put my rainwater leader one right here if I could, because that would hide the joint between the new brick and the old brick, and it would give you a transition that it doesn't look like if there's a little bit different coloring in the brick, it doesn't stand out. It'll make it look a lot better. I would also save the brick. So if we're looking at this closely, I'm assuming this window does not really exist. So this is one we've got to cut in. And so that I'm picking up on that because it's the same size as this. So they're going to make it like on both sides of the fireplace, make it look nice and symmetrical. And when I'm looking outside, there you go, there's the two. So I doubt this is existing. It says new window. So that means I'm going to have to cut this out. So there's several ways you could do that. You could cut it out with a saw and then have the window fairly close out to the outside edge. And that might match up reasonably well. The other way is that you could take some of the brick that you took out from the back wall and use that to tooth into this and to use over the top, because there won't be a soldier course over the top. You'll have to put that in. And the other place that I see on this drawing is here, remove existing window frame, brick up opening. So in this case, I got to brick up this opening. So you take out the sill and you tooth it in using the brick that you opened up and you took out of the back of the house. So this brick, I would save whatever brick I could for this window that I'm going to be filling in, right? And for any patching that I've got to do on this window. And then it looks really nice. I'm sure you've seen, well, if you haven't, you'll probably notice it after this lecture, older houses where they patched in a brick and they've done like a horrible job and it just looks awful. And I'm sure you've seen ones, well, you probably haven't because they kind of just seem to blend in. You can usually tell the mortar joints are a little bit, even us, we used to put a touch of black coloring in the mortar joint. And then if it was a real sort of matchup, I would even get some mud and rub it on it and then clean it off. And it makes it look a little bit more aged as opposed to too crisp and clean. And I wouldn't do a concave joint where I join it up because typically the old joint is worn out. It's a sand and lime mortar. So I would just cut it off and have it a little bit looking that kind of rustic look. So there's a few things that you can do to try to match that up that makes it look better. So these little, it's the little things, right, in making a renovation kind of flow and look like it belongs on the house. So there's the simple deck. Earlier in one of the earlier chapters, chapter 4, there's a pretty nice detail of a deck detail that you could take a look at if you wanted to see more information on that, but kind of goes through the process of adding that on and thinking about those types of layouts. And what is similar, here's the hexagon symbol, the numbering system, and you can just look at the hexagon and the numbering system just the way that we did in new construction. You can find all your information there. Same sort of ideas and straight from the building code kind of information in Imperial in this case. Nothing really changes that way. This particular drawing has a room schedule, like just a generic one. If you wanted to take it to the nth degree, you'd have the model number of the ceramic tile and what you're going to use, and the paint chip number that you're going to use, and that sort of stuff. So schedules you'll find as you further study construction and you get into institutional, commercial, industrial, condominium buildings, things like that. Schedules are just tables that you can organize information. You've seen it already on things like a lintel schedule or table or beam table or beam schedule on the Brook drawings. Same idea. So you'll find quite extensive schedules like for things like caissons and piles and columns in ICI kind of projects. It's just a way of organizing information so it's easy to find and easy to put information into your drawings that are easily decipherable and findable. And again, we've got a legend. First place I look if I'm looking to use things. Same idea for outlets, etc. And this is always the best place to look because this is the way that the designer is using the symbols. I think these ones are pretty much the same as all the ones that we saw in the Brook. The Cassidy drawings are done very well and they have typical kind of ones, but I don't always see that. Sometimes I do see a few confusing ones, and so it's helpful if that designers then use the legend so I know what they mean. And so those are usually good ways of putting this. By the way, all drawings don't always have this hexagon. I just find the better organized ones do with regards to residential construction projects. I find that it's very helpful when they are done to this standard. But there's no design police that's chasing after people that don't do that. So don't be surprised sometimes if that's not the case. Just got to look at it and then sort of say, I'm going to figure this out step by step, what the process and what the designer was thinking, and accept too that not all drawings are created equally. There's good ones and there's not so good ones out there. The more questions that you can, that just means more RFIs and more clarifications if you're on your A game, so you don't miss stuff. Yeah, and I would with a project like this be thinking about, all right, so I visualize, I come in the front door, this is all existing stuff, the dining room is over here, right over here. This would be the stairs to the basement. If I was coming out the basement, okay, so then I would be coming from here. There's the rest of the basement layout. This is all going to be opened up. This could be a great recreation room by the look of it. It's going to be like 17 foot 9, and it's going to be quite wide across, about 26 feet roughly if we're looking up here at this dimension. So I'm visualizing this space here. So it's going to be quite nice when it's all done. Breakfast room, bedroom over here, bedroom over there. This must be the master bedroom given the walk-in closet kind of effect over here. This dashed line over here is telling me there's an attic access hatch over here. This looks like the old-fashioned solid masonry fireplace going in here. This would be the fireplace details that I showed you back in chapter 13. So that sort of connection going on there. So hopefully you can sort of see some of the things that you look at it differently from a renovation perspective. The inspection process is really important, to inspect it really closely, to have a checklist and go through it, and have a checklist that you've thought of things ahead of time, because it's so easy to miss stuff. And that's the thing with renovations. You got to have some good contingency management in your pricing model for renovations, because there will be things that either you didn't allocate properly for or enough for, and that can very quickly mean that you're working for nothing on this project. So things really do take a lot of time and effort with renovations. And you have to remember too, you're typically working in somebody's house, and you have to have a lot of respect for the house that you're working in and the people that you're working for. There's a lot more interactions that occur in that respect. New construction, even custom homes. People are very fussy about the custom homes, but they're not necessarily on top of you all the time there, so to speak. So it's a little bit, it's a lot different, to be honest. It's a lot different. Having done both, it's a lot different. So hopefully that gives you a good introduction that way. So we'll be moving on to chapter 11b. And so this is Tom Stephenson wishing you a wonderful day, and goodbye for now.